And so now I want to take the opportunity and so pleased to have it to introduce our keynote speaker, Steve Lee. And I really appreciate Steve answering the call to join us today. Steve Lee is the Chief Executive Officer of Astrosat, an astronautics and Earth observation company headquartered in Musselburgh, Scotland, on Earth. A proven innovator and entrepreneur, Steve is also an award-winning astrophysicist and astronautical engineer. Through his leadership at Astrosat, he is paving the way for space solutions using innovation to solve global challenges. He's been a great partner with us here at the UAH College of Business and the Huntsville community. He's collaborated, in fact, with the Huntsville Chamber of Commerce in sponsoring the Astrosat Huntsville Challenge as part of the European Space Agency's Space Exploration Masters Challenges. This competition looked for commercially viable business applications for missions in low Earth orbit, which could use the Sierra Nevada Corporation's Dream Chaser for purposes that look beyond Earth observation and cargo delivery. And Huntsville is in the running to be a spaceport, a landing spot for the Dream Chaser. Astrosat's current focus is on managed space solutions and services focused on economic resilience at the government level, as well as low-carbon core infrastructure and renewable energy solutions. As part of this, Astrosat recently moved into ISS hardware and payload development as part of their turnkey EO campaign services. Steve, thanks again for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Welcome to my lockdown recovery vehicle. I'm sorry to present to you from an old 100-year-old wooden schooner, but yeah, this is kind of how I've got through lockdown. I'll tell you a wee bit about it to start with. So what I'm going to do is this is the end of a fantastic event, NASA doing what they do. Last keynote speech. It's 6 o'clock over here in the northeast coast of the UK. So I'm going to keep this kind of fireside, chilled out. You know, we're sitting in the saloon of an old wooden schooner that I've rebuilt, and I'm going to be very colloquial and irreverent and just really tell you a story. I think I'll fold the boat in later on, just so you know. Lockdown was pretty severe in the UK, and I found it very hard. And my entire company, who are very used to holding each other and being in front of whiteboards and inventing and talking, you know, that was kind of just whipped out from under us. We've done really well out of it because we can turn things around, but we've all missed each other. I travel a lot. I used to travel all the time. That's what I love to do. I'm an explorer. I'm a troublemaker. I like to get out in the world and find out what's going on. And that was removed from my life, and I found it very hard. So what it did do was give me some time to focus on some hobbies, one of which I'm sitting in right now. I'm calling you from the boat because our lockdown should be lifting pretty soon, and we rebuilt the boat down in the south of England, and I want it to be up in the Firth of Forth in Edinburgh or the west coast of Scotland as soon as possible, because I want to take my crew out on the boat and for us all to just get back to being in love and exploring and looking at the stars. And there's not much of a window for that. So tomorrow we cast off, and we're sailing from Newcastle up to Edinburgh, and then in May we're going to the west coast. So I did have much choice, a small weather window. That's why I'm speaking to you from a boat. So yeah, let me explain myself. So I'm basically a musician in a wooden shipwright pretending to be an astrophysicist. I was very blessed with a genetic need to rebel and an innovative spark that you just can't get out of the Celtic gene. And I studied astrophysics. When I finished my degree, I studied in Edinburgh and Caltech and Cranfield. Got addicted to the American way of doing things. I'm a banjo player, so I was always America destined anyway. I have a wooden schooner, which is American. So when I came back and finished all my studies, I was sadly Scottish and UK, and there wasn't really much space at all going on. So, I had all these ambitions, but there were no jobs for it. Now, I'm an entrepreneur, which means that I'm fundamentally unemployable. That's part of the route. And even then, there was no jobs in the space sector at all in the UK. So I reverted back to my old kind of instincts and became a musician for 10 years in my 20s. Something I'm extremely proud of. Being a musician, being a songwriter is exactly the same mechanisms you use when you're an inventor or an engineer or a scientist. It's just pure creation. The advantage of being a musician is that you have to communicate with people. But that's what I did in my 20s. And I felt like I'd wasted my university degree. I adored physics. I adored space. But there were no jobs. And I couldn't go into academia. I'm too much of a troublemaker. And like I said, I couldn't get a job because I'm an entrepreneur. So I just stuck with music. Now, this was in the early noughties, and you brave, bold thinkers in America were kind of ahead of Europe. So you started to commercialize space. You started to open up space for commercial innovators. And I watched it jealously whenever I wasn't playing on stage or writing terrible music. And I wondered, how could I get into this? And I started to lose my physics too. So steadily what happened was the European Space Agency slowly started to follow what was happening in NASA. And the UK was still a part of Europe then. But I saw an opportunity starting to arrive where we could do what was happening in America. And I was starting to get a little bit older, was entering my 30s. A couple of things happened in life. I fell in love with a beautiful girl and got married, and I had to grow up and not just be a musician. So I was constantly thinking, what could I do? What could we do with space, with my skills, with what I know? And my wife turned around to me one day and said, I've got some big news for you. I'm pregnant. And I said to her, well, I've got some big news too. I'm going to start a space company. So a bit of a shock. And she basically gave me 9 months to try this out, or get a real job. And that was it, life come along. So what I wanted to do was as quick as possible, with no backing, no VC money, no cash in the bank, get a company going. And the best way to do that was with Earth observation. So 9 months and counting, I decided that the only way to do it was to innovate. That was probably the only true gift that creatively we had. Space sector was starting to grow in the European Union. There was a program called the GMES, which is now Copernicus, that was opening its doors for brand new ideas. So I put a couple of ideas in there, and one of them won an award. So with that award, we kind of became vindicated. When I say we, it was basically me and a couple of other people. And with that, we started Astrosat. Now, we're almost 10 years on now. We won multiple awards, but the whole ethos of Astrosat became this ridiculous concept of every problem has a space solution. So that's kind of the heartbeat of Astrosat. That's what we do. Every problem has a space solution. So what we would do, and what we still continue to do, now it's much bigger and growing, was that we would basically take everything that, almost like when I left uni, I adore the space industry, but it's not going to look after us. So I took that into the whole business plan of Astrosat. I was a pretty good musician. It's all about creativity. And what we did is for as much as it pained us, we completely turned our back against the space sector. And we went out into the real world and took this proposition that every problem has a space solution out into the world. So we didn't go to space conferences. We didn't talk to space people. It was painful because I love talking to space people. What we did was we spoke to energy companies. We spoke to people that owned ports, people that own boats, people that own planes, people that own paper mills. And we said, what's your problem? And a lot of them had problems. And that was the way that we could apply space technology to get in there. And that was our mantra from the get-go. And it's now grown into something that is an established business. So why am I speaking to you? Why is Jason giving me the great honor of speaking to you? Well, I'm a bootstrapper. As I've told you, I think a little bit differently. And for as much as I love the space sector, I don't see any future in the space sector for my business or for the commercialization of space. So as a bootstrapper, as a gigging musician, astrophysicist, you got to pay your own way. We are not the classic West Coast space entrepreneurial thing. I mean, there was only about 4 companies 8 years ago founded the UK space that's dealing with the unsexy side of space. I think it's very easy to raise money to become a quick startup entrepreneur when there's rockets involved, because it's tempting. And I saw a lot of that in the early days of the growth of new space in the UK, where you could just drop space into conversation and you'd get the funding. So you get this big boom, this kind of zeitgeist effect, early stages of a bubble that will inevitably burst. But it seems cool. You get a whole bunch of entrepreneurs bumping up and, governments can make some headlines. Problem is, of course, once they get to the reality that it's really hard, it all falls apart. So you get this big boom and then you get this long tail. Now, Earth observation is an absolute exemplar of that. So when space started in the UK and in Europe, Europe has a huge kind of business plan about space data rather than the rockets and the sexy stuff. We will stick with space data, space applications. And that's what it was all about at the start. That was about 6 years ago. These days, they don't talk about it much at all. They're now having to divert and talk about the sexy launches and all the kind of fun stuff. And that's a real tragedy. So, I'm gonna use props. As far as I can see, the space sector treats Earth observation like binoculars. But what they do, these are my dad's binoculars. He taught me calculus and he gave me these. The space sector looks at Earth observation like that. They see it extremely far away, right? It's there. It's just you have to turn it around. And that's an innovative fact that sometimes the easy stuff is the hardest to do and takes the longest. Now, the Earth observation sector, which, as I've said, is the absolute foundation of commercialization of space, because it's bringing everything we do back down to Earth, for the people, creating business. I've done it for 9 years. Many, many others will do it better. But it takes a long time. I would say that most people give up on Earth observation. The Earth observation sector, which 8 years ago was heralded as being the big thing to buy into, is now not talked about. And that's not because it's failed, it's because we haven't seen it through. It's there, you're just looking through the binoculars in the wrong way. It takes absolute business skill to turn it into a reality. And that's what I have to do to start with. We are an innovative company. Yes, as Jason said, we're getting into the upstream. We have loads of ideas, great innovations for in-orbit work, but it's a bit like getting an album deal. You know, you have to be able to sit in a Nashville bar and get your tip jar filled before you get any album deal. And to me, succeeding in the long haul of Earth observation profitability is my Nashville tip jar. Until we can fill that jar up, we ain't going to get any album deal. We're not going to get into the upstream. So I'll see it through or it'll kill me. And then I'm faced with how do I fill that tip jar up in the Earth observation sector. So what I'm going to tell you are just my thoughts with great humility as to why the Earth observation sector has failed to take off and why it will absolutely take off if we just stick with it a little longer. And fundamentally, it's about turning our backs away from the space industry and going out and getting muddy and dirty and wet and windy, take on the nasty seas. That's the big picture. But to break it down, it's just business in the end. So when I was a young man, entrepreneurism definitely ages you quickly. I used to go to conferences in Europe, and they were great fun. I used to do a couple in America as well. And all these kind of incumbent fuddy-duddies would come up, because I was the new kid on the block. And they'd always say to me, yeah, you have this business, and it's getting lots of prime contracts, and it's booming. And they would go, look down on me and go, well, but we don't understand what your business plan is. One time you're working on ports that are freezing. Next time you're working on flooding systems or disaster management or energy solutions, and we don't really understand who you are. And I'm quite a petulant guy, and I'm a natural rebel, so that kind of question hacked me off. And as a petulant guy, I turned around to them and said, well, I know you don't understand our business plan, but it's quite simple. What we do is we buy something and we sell it for more than we bought it for, and it's called a profit. And I would walk away and they would, judge me as being petulant and troublemaking. And I was being petulant. I've grown up a little bit more. But there's something fundamental in that I was saying an established business, a growing business, is driven by profits. Profits. Buy something, sell it for more. So we take on as many challenges as possible. We meet as many people as we can, and we ask them, what's your problem? We try and solve it. And in solving it, we will use space data, we will use our own platform, we'll use a hell of a lot of other bits of data, and we will sell it on to them. Now, how do you make that business sustainable? Well, this is basic business. It's value add, it's called. You can't make a profit without value. So you've got to somehow sell what we do in the Earth observation sector in some way to make the customers continually pay for it at a profit. And I think there's 3 ways to do that. Okay? 1, this is in my experience, the best way to sell space services or space data services. The first one is you've got to find a law or a directive. That's the easiest way to sell space data. If a corporate or an entity is bound by law to do something, and you can find a way to do it from space or other data fusion, then you have an absolute easy business win. And the reason for that kind of splits in 2. Let me give you an example. I can't talk directly about our own customers because it's not the right thing to do, but think about pollution. So if you're a industrial company sitting on a lake, you are legally obliged to not pollute the lake. it goes in two. Either the company really cares about that and they want to make sure that they're not polluting the lake, or they don't care about it and they want to make sure that you give them a get out of jail card. Earth observation in that scenario will absolutely drive business, and it's an easy win. Second way that you provide value add in the Earth observation sector is with efficiency changes. So one of the, again, trying to not, mention our customers, one thing you can imagine was shipping companies. Imagine shipping companies that are fearful of leaving San Francisco to land in Alaska, and they don't know when the port's going to freeze. To have a boat trapped out at sea in a frozen port is exceedingly expensive. If you can use meteorology and Earth observation to tell them when a port's going to be frozen beforehand, then they can save efficiencies in being stuck outside that port. So efficiency saving creates a value add. It's a harder sell because speaking to a board of directors, it will pretty much split in 50-50 before they sign the check. And the reason for that is that most business people split in two. Half of them like turnover and don't understand profitability, and the others understand cost reduction, which has an impact on profitability. So if your pitch is about cost efficiencies, you're probably going to win it, but it's not going to be the easiest gig. But that's one way that the Earth observation sector can definitely provide value add and get some deals. The third one, and this is really hard, and this is one that I'm still trying to break, is you have to create a product that you give to somebody that they then go and make money out of. So there's the value add. So I'm still working on that one. It's the only sector you could really find that in is within extraction industries, mining, that type of stuff. So far, I'm not giving up on that one. I'm pretty sure I can nail that challenge. But you can imagine if you can show someone a map where they can go and dig for something, then you're providing a service, they pay for it, they make money out of that. Those are the three things I'm facing that and winning that make Astrosat's Earth observation services successful, and it's all about business. It's all about the value add. Why do we all fail? Why has it taken 8 years with massive government funding and support? It's now kind of been forgotten about because it hasn't succeeded, because they're looking through the long end of the binoculars. Why haven't we achieved that? Right, okay, hard truth. First of all, most of us space people, as brilliant as we are in our heads, are pretty bad at talking to people. And I mean without our industry. Talking to an oil and gas guy can be hard work. Convincing a CEO of an energy company to follow your path and buy into that efficiency saving value add, that's a tough gig. You've got to be pretty quick on your game to pull that off. Most of the people and the entrepreneurs in our industry, particularly I find the ones that are VC backed, they're not well heeled and used to that kind of banter business that you really need to cut a deal over. So our space industry needs to employ an awful lot more non-graduates, an awful lot more people that are used to just cutting deals, because it's not rocket science. It's rocket science is the worst thing that could ever happen to our industry, because we all like to say that we're rocket scientists, but it keeps us completely dissociated from where the money is. It's a snobbery thing. You've got to get down and dirty with the people, fill your tip jar in Nashville. If you can't do that as the CEO of a space business, you're never going to make business. That's one thought. The other thought, and again, I'm going to use props, is the space Earth observation industry is completely too used to the old thing, right? So here's an example. Look at this. That is a brass cleat. That I bought yesterday, and I'm installing it tonight for the sale tomorrow. Now, that is beautiful, absolutely beautiful, and it cost £180. Now, I have to put that on my beautiful old wooden schooner because it's a 100-year-old design. It's an American-lined Peterson schooner, and it deserves a bit of brass. But it does the same job as that. That cost £4. Now, we're all used to that in the space industry. It's great when you're selling. It's not so good when you're buying. And as the space industry is going out into the world, there's going to be more people buying into the value add. Now, the problem I see in the Earth observation sector is the pricing is all wrong. I was taught basic economics in school, supply and demand. And the Earth observation providers still can't get that basic thing. Everything is too overpriced and no one's buying it. So of course it's stalled. The market forces of basic supply and demand haven't found equilibrium, and they will. And the other problem, I think, so what am I on now? Yeah, my third problem. First one, we don't know how to fill a tip jar and communicate with people that aren't in the space industry. Second, we overprice everything just because it's space. Third thing is that a lot of the Earth observation providers, they kind of remind me of, they're always trying to do in-orbit operations, launches, and data analytics and sales. Now, in theory, it's entirely possible. There's companies that do it incredibly well. Spire, Planet, they do it really well. But it's a bit like being a pianist and a trumpet player. It's easy to do, but they're entirely fundamentally different things. So a lot of the space companies that own assets in space also want to sell their own data analytics. And what they're turning out like is kind of one of those one-man band kind of things with the guy with the drum on the back and the cymbals on his knee and the guitar and the kazoo. They're trying to do too much at once. They think that because they can operate satellites and launch them, that the Earth observation data analytics and the business analysis and the sales is going to be easy. But it's not. They're really hard. They're entirely different things. So I think that a lot of the space operators need to appreciate that they sell the pixels at the right price equilibrium, and that maybe analytics companies have to step in and fill the last gap to get it out, or the last mile to get it out in front of people that will actually pay. And that those people are going to be human being boards of directors, tough, gritty business people, and those conversations are not going to involve Maxwell's equations. They're going to involve a bit of hustle and a bit of reality. So, yeah, that's it from me. The message being that we are a classic example of a dirty boot, dirty need company, and we are on our way to America as soon as possible. So I hope that's been of value.